Some customers come and go, but the one who visits at 2:14 a.m. has been coming for decades. And tonight, he finally noticed me. But before I get into that, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, only if you enjoy these stories. Comment where you're listening from. And if you've ever lived somewhere that just didn't feel right, I want to hear your story for a future video. All right, get comfortable. Turn down the lights. My first night on the night shift felt wrong before I even stepped inside. The parking lot of the gas station was empty except for a single street lamp, humming like it was struggling to stay awake. The rest of the lot sat in darkness, swallowed by the long stretch of highway behind it. No cars, no wind, not even the sound of insects. Just stillness, the kind that presses against your ears until you realize you can hear your own heartbeat. Inside, the air felt stale, like someone had sealed the place shut for years and only opened it moments before I arrived. The fluorescent lights flickered in slow pulses, not enough to plunge me into darkness, but enough to make everything look slightly out of focus. And the store, it was too quiet. Not normal store quiet. It was the type of quiet where you feel like you're interrupting something by existing. The day cashier looked exhausted, and I mean really exhausted. She didn't even try to hide the relief on her face when I walked in. She handed me the keys like she was passing off a cursed object, and before leaving, she paused at the door and said something that stuck with me long after she drove away. If anything weird happens after 2, just ignore it. She didn't laugh, didn't smile, didn't soften it with a joke. She just left. I tried to shake it off. First nights are always awkward, right? Maybe she was just messing with the new girl. I busied myself behind the counter, cleaned surfaces that didn't need cleaning, reorganized gum packs that were already in perfect rows. Anything to distract myself from the feeling that the store was aware of me. Every time I stopped moving, I felt eyes on me, not from a person, more like from corners, ceiling corners, especially the far one near the snack aisle, where the light buzzed the loudest. I'd turn my head and nothing would be there, but the air would shift, as if something had just moved out of sight. Around midnight, a series of soft clicks started echoing above me. The cameras, the motion-activated ones. They'd swivel in tiny mechanical jerks, tracking movement I couldn't see. Every few minutes, one of the screens would flicker, glitch into static, then clear up again. I found myself watching them more than the actual store. The front door made a soft metallic creak from time to time, like someone was gently pushing it, but not enough to trigger the chime. Once, I could have sworn I saw the handle move. Just a little, just enough. I kept checking the time, telling myself the night wasn't as long as it felt. But the minutes crawled by. 12:32, 12 more 48, 1:03. I swear the clock was slowing down. Every sound felt amplified. My own breathing sounded too loud. When I opened a can of soda, the hiss made me flinch like I'd fired a gun. Around 1:40, the lights flickered harder. Once, twice. Then a long dimming that stretched just a second too long. When they came back, one of the aisles looked darker than the rest, as if the shadows there were thicker, heavier. I told myself I was just nervous, first night jitters. But deep down, something cold twisted in my stomach. Something instinctual, like I'd stepped somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. And when the little bell above the back stockroom door chimed, despite the door being locked, that feeling sharpened from unease into a warning. I wasn't alone in that gas station. I wasn't alone from the moment I walked in. By the time the day cashier showed up for shift change, I was already rattled from the silence, the flickering lights, and that strange, heavy feeling pressing against the store's walls. She came in fast, like she'd sprinted from her car. Her name tag read Lucy, but the dark circles under her eyes made her look like she hadn't slept in weeks, maybe months. "Hey," she said, barely glancing at me as she started counting the drawer, her fingers moving with the speed of someone desperate to finish. "You're the new night girl, right? Maya." I nodded, trying to smile, trying to look normal, or at least like the store didn't feel wrong in the way an abandoned house feels wrong. She didn't return the smile. She just shoved the last of the bills into place, slammed the register closed, and grabbed her purse like she was ready to run. "You'll be fine," she muttered, not reassuring, not even close, more like someone whispering to themselves. Before I could ask anything, like why she seemed terrified of standing still, she paused at the door. And then she said it. "Oh, and if you hear or see anything weird after 2, she forced a laugh, but the sound cracked halfway out of her throat. "Just ignore it." I blinked. "Weird how?" She looked over her shoulder. Her expression didn't match her forced laughter. Her eyes were dead serious. "You'll know it when it happens." And then she was gone. She didn't even wait for me to respond. Her keys jingled as she practically sprinted out to her car, started it before the seatbelt was even on, and peeled out of the lot like something was chasing her. The door clicked shut with this soft, final sound. That was the moment the store felt different, colder, quieter, like the building exhaled now that she was gone. I walked back to the counter, trying to brush off the comment. People joke about night shifts all the time, sleep-deprived humor, inside jokes, hazing the new hire. I kept repeating that to myself. I even laughed out loud just to hear something other than the steady hum of the lights. But the laughter died as soon as I noticed the security screens again. Every single monitor had a faint grain over it. Not static, just a slight shimmering, like heat waves rising off asphalt. Except instead of distorting the air, it distorted the store. The aisles looked a little bent, the shadows sharper, the corners darker. I tried focusing on something normal, stocking cigarettes, checking inventory sheets, anything. But Lucy's words kept replaying in my mind. Ignore weird stuff after 2 a.m. Not, don't worry. Not, it's nothing. Just ignore it. Why word it like that? Why that tone? And why did she look like she was remembering something? Something she hoped I'd never have to learn. Around 1:30, I found a note she'd left for me taped under the counter. It wasn't official. It wasn't even written on store paper. It was torn from a small notebook, the handwriting shaky. "Don't check the windows if you hear tapping." No explanation, no signature, just that. I read it 3 times. When I looked back up at the security screens, one of the cameras, the one facing the parking lot, flickered for a moment, just long enough for me to see something move in the reflection of the glass, something tall, something close. I swallowed hard. Lucy didn't just give me a warning. She gave me a countdown. And 2 a.m. was getting closer. By the time the clock crept toward 2 a.m., the air inside the gas station felt heavier, like the whole building was holding its breath. I kept glancing at the time without meaning to. The digital numbers above the counter glowed faintly in the dim light. 2:07 a.m. I told myself Lucy's warnings were getting into my head. Just exhaustion, just nerves. But the silence wasn't normal anymore. It felt intentional, like the world outside the glass had decided to stop moving. I was wiping down the counter for maybe the 10th time when the first crackle snapped through the store. A sharp pop, like static discharging, echoed from the wall of surveillance monitors behind me. I turned just in time to see all 10 screens warp at once, bending inward as though the images were being sucked down into a tunnel. For a split second, the aisles on the screen looked stretched, elongated, and some shape, flickered between them before everything snapped back to normal. I froze. The air went cold. Not cooler, cold. My breath didn't frost, but it felt like it should. The monitors crackled again. This time, one screen cut to black, then another, then another. A soft beep sounded somewhere above me, then another, then 3 more in quick succession, the motion sensors. I spun around the store, expecting someone, anyone, to be walking through an aisle, but there was nobody. The rack stood perfectly still, no shifting shadows, no movement, just that suffocating stillness. But the sensors kept beeping, one after another. Beep, 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 beep. It sounded like something was moving through the store, invisible, passing each sensor as though it walked a path between the aisles. I swallowed hard and stepped around the counter, forcing myself to check aisle 1. Empty. I walked across the store, listening. Every time I reached an aisle, the motion sensor on the opposite side went off, as if whatever was moving didn't want me to catch up to it, as if it was pacing me. A flicker pulled my attention back to the monitors. All of them were glitching now. Lines of static rolled down the screens in uneven waves, distorting the shapes of the shelves. On one monitor, the one near the freezer section, the entire frame flashed white for a second, and I swear I saw an outline, a figure, tall, too thin, standing still at the end of the frozen food aisle. I blinked, and it was gone. The air grew even colder. Another pop cracked through the speakers, and the intercom let out a low, warbling, static hum that made the hairs on my arm stand up. The sound wasn't like ordinary static. It had a rhythm, rising and falling almost like breathing. I backed toward the counter, my steps slow, careful. For the first time that night, I felt the instinct to run, not walk, run. The clock changed. 2:10 a.m., the exact minute everything fell apart. Every monitor stuttered violently, images smearing sideways like they were melting off the screens. The parking lot camera suddenly lit up with a bright flare, then stayed on that overexposed white image like something too bright to look at was standing just outside the windows. The motion sensors all triggered at once, every single one, every aisle, every corner, beeping in chaotic, overlapping bursts. It sounded like the entire store was filled with people moving around me, walking, circling, shifting. But there was no one. I stood alone in the center of that cold, humming, glitching building, listening to something I couldn't see pass through the aisles like a crowd made of smoke. The static on the monitors slowed, then rolled upward. All screens cleared at the same time, and every camera was suddenly pointed at the front door, as if the system itself was looking for something, or waiting. My stomach dropped. Whatever Lucy was warning me about, whatever she wanted me to ignore, it was almost 2:14. The clock above the counter flicked from 2:13 to 2:14, and the shift was so small, just 2 digits changing, that it shouldn't have meant anything. But the whole building reacted. The lights dimmed in one long, slow pulse, like the store was exhaling. The hum of the coolers faded. The motion sensors went dead silent. Even the security screens froze for half a second, as if bracing for something inevitable. And then the front door opened. Except it didn't sound like it opened. There was no chime, no whoosh of air, no footsteps. The glass door simply slid inward an inch, then another, moving just enough to let the cold night leak inside. A shape stepped through. A man, or at least something shaped like one, wearing a dark hooded jacket that hung too long past his wrists, heavy with what looked like dust or dried mud. He didn't lower the hood, didn't push it back, just stood in the doorway as the lights flickered again, brighter this time, like they were trying to illuminate him but couldn't quite reach through whatever covered him. He didn't walk in so much as glide in small, steady strides that were too measured to feel natural. One step, pause. 2 steps, pause. Every monitor behind me froze as he moved, each frame locking like a paused video. On-screen timestamps flickered between the present moment and older dates, 1989, 2003, 1995, 2017, jumping so fast I couldn't track them. Only one thing stayed consistent. His figure on every screen, always in the same posture, always facing straight ahead. He didn't look at me when he reached the counter. At least, I don't think he did. The hood masked everything. I couldn't even see the suggestion of a face beneath the shadows. He stopped right in front of me, close enough for me to see flakes of something, rust, old dirt, falling off his sleeves. Close enough to feel a faint cold radiating from him that crawled across my hands on the counter. He placed something down without a sound. 3 coins. Old coins, tarnished to the point that the designs were nearly rubbed off. They weren't any currency I recognized. They looked ancient, unearthed from somewhere they should have stayed buried. I swallowed. Is this for... What do you want to buy? He didn't speak, didn't move. The register beeped behind me, even though I hadn't touched it. The screen lit up on its own, highlighting a single item. Water. 1 bottle. I didn't ring that up. He hadn't touched anything from the shelves. And yet the system knew exactly what he wanted. I reached slowly for a bottle of water behind me, placing it in front of him. The entire time I was moving, the cameras behind me stuttered like a failing heartbeat. Freeze, unfreeze, freeze, unfreeze. Each time distorting his outline more and more. His hand, pale and too thin at the knuckles, slid out from the sleeve just enough to take the bottle. The nails were short but discolored, like he'd clawed through earth recently. The moment he picked up the water, every single security monitor cut to black. A soft beep pulled my attention downward. The coins on the counter had changed positions. I hadn't touched them. He hadn't moved. The coins now sat in a perfect line, edges touching, pointing directly toward the store's back exit, like an arrow. Before I could ask anything else, he reached out with his other hand and gently tapped the counter with one fingertip, a polite gesture. But the sound was wrong. It was too loud, echoing unnaturally through the store, like a knock on metal. Then he stepped back. 1 step, pause. 2 steps, pause. And he left the same way he came, silently. The door eased, open for him without a chime, then shut with a soft click. When I checked the monitors again, the system was still frozen. But a single frame had burned itself into the screen. The hooded man, standing inches behind where I'd just been, facing me, even though he'd never moved like that in reality. The timestamp at the bottom of the image wasn't just wrong. It was dated 1987. And the figure behind the counter, the blurry silhouette, it looked like me. My hands were still shaking when the door shut behind him. The coins were still lined up on the counter like they were pointing to a place I didn't want to go, but I couldn't look at them anymore. My eyes kept drifting to the security monitors. They were still frozen on that impossible frame. The hooded man behind me, a distorted silhouette of what looked like me working the counter in a different decade. I don't know what made me do it. Curiosity, panic, a need to prove I wasn't losing my mind. But I grabbed the DVR remote from under the counter and started scrolling back through the footage. Midnight, the aisles, empty. 1 a.m., a moth beating itself against the outside lights. 2 a.m., the usual dead stillness of a place nobody wants to visit. And then 2:14. There he was, the hooded man, standing exactly where he'd stood tonight. Same posture, same slow, unnatural steps. The water bottle, always the same brand, appearing in his hand even when he didn't pick it up. The coins placed carefully on the counter, though sometimes they looked newer, sometimes older, depending on the year. I felt my pulse in my throat. I rewound again. Yesterday, 2:14 a.m., same time, same man, same routine. Again. The night before that, 2:14 a.m., same thing. My breath started coming in shallow pools. I kept rewinding faster and faster, watching nights blur by in reverse like a horrible time lapse of a haunting. 2 weeks back, he was there. A month back, still there. I scrolled into the archive folder, expecting the footage to stop eventually, or corrupt, or glitch out. But it didn't. The timestamp rolled back further and further. 2015, 2016, 2017. The footage changed quality, grainier, lower resolution, but the hooded figure stayed the same. Same clothes, same walk, same slow, methodical movements. He didn't age, he didn't change. Only the store around him did. Shelves rearranged, prices swapped, logos updated. The man, though, he was constant. I scrolled back 30 years, 1987. That year's footage was barely recognizable. The store was smaller, dimmer. The camera sat at a different angle, mounted on an older bracket. But the timestamp still read 2:14 a.m. And there he was, standing at the counter, placing coins down in the same formation as he did tonight. But something was different. The cashier behind the counter wasn't blurry or distorted like I'd thought. The older screens didn't have the clarity of the new ones, which made the image even more surreal. But the shape of the woman behind the register, her hair, her stance, her posture, it was clear enough. She looked like me. No, too much like me. I leaned closer until my nose was almost touching the monitor. Her face wasn't perfectly visible, but the outline, the curve of her cheek, the way she held her shoulders, it was like looking into a mirror where time had rubbed out the details. My stomach dropped. My fingertips went numb. The hooded man moved on the screen, if you could call it movement. He glitched forward in small jumps, like the footage was skipping even though it wasn't. And when he turned his head, just slightly, toward the camera, toward me, I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. It didn't feel like I was looking at a recording anymore. It felt like he was aware of me watching. The screen flickered violently. Static erupted across the monitors. And then, just for a moment, the feed showed something that wasn't from the past or the present. Me, behind the counter, dust settling around me like ash, the hooded man standing beside me. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. Tomorrow. I dropped the remote. It clattered across the counter and hit the floor. The sound too loud in the suffocating silence. Whatever this thing was that visited the store, whatever it was marking with its ancient coins and repeated ritual, it wasn't done with me. The image on the monitor flickered long enough for me to see the hooded man take one step closer to the counter, closer to me, before the screen snapped to black again. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The only sound in the entire gas station was the faint buzz of the lights overhead. But it felt like the silence was listening, watching, waiting. I grabbed the remote again with trembling hands and rewound the footage, pausing it frame by frame until I reached that single moment where his hand brushed across the counter. His sleeve had slipped back just enough to reveal something pale on his wrist. I zoomed in as much as the old system allowed. The pixels blurred together at first, but slowly, bit by bit, the image clarified. A band, white, plastic, thin. A hospital ID bracelet. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a smudge on the screen, or a trick of the low resolution. But when I adjusted the contrast, the numbers sharpened into focus. B03007. Simple, unassuming. Except something about the code made my skin crawl. It felt familiar without being anything I recognized. My brain reacted before I could make any sense of it. The bracelet wasn't old, not like the coins. It looked new, clean, like he had just come from a hospital, even though nothing else about him felt remotely alive or present. I kept staring at it. That code. B0307. B0307. B03. The screen glitched, slicing the image into jagged pieces. A high-pitched whine rang out from the speakers. For a second it sounded like an alarm, like a hospital monitor flatlining. Not loud, but distant, as if it was coming from somewhere far beneath the building. I jerked back instinctively. The footage stabilized again, but this time, when I looked at the man's wrist, the bracelet was gone. Not slid up his sleeve, not hidden by movement, just gone, as though it had never been there at all. I rewound again, paused. There it was, forward a few frames, gone. It made no sense. The coins rattled softly on the counter, even though I wasn't touching them. That sound, metal tapping, gently, like someone flicking a fingernail against them, made the hairs on my arms rise. I didn't want to look at them, but my eyes kept drifting down. That's when I noticed something else. A faint smear on the counter I hadn't seen before. Pale grey, almost like dust or dried clay, the same colour that had flaked off his sleeves. I brushed it lightly with my fingertip. It felt cold, not room temperature cold. Cold like metal left outside in winter. When I lifted my finger, the smear clung to my skin. Then, slowly, darkened, like something sinking into the tiny lines of my fingerprint. My stomach twisted. I turned back to the monitors, trying to focus on anything other than the creeping chill crawling up my arm. The footage was still paused on the exact moment the bracelet was visible. I zoomed in again. This time, the system didn't fight me. The pixels sharpened more than they should have been able to on a machine this old. And under the code, there was a name. Not a full name, just 2 letters. May. The rest was cut off by static. My breath caught. I didn't know whether it was coincidence or something worse, but I didn't have time to process it, because then the lights above me flickered. Hard, once, twice, a long, dragging dim. And when they came back, the dust smear on my counter was gone. My hand was clean, as if nothing had touched me. The only proof that anything had changed at all was the faint reflection in the darkened monitor screen, directly behind my shoulder. A shape, tall, still, hooded, standing just at the edge of the counter, watching me. I spun around so fast the remote clattered to the floor. No one was there, just the aisles, the coolers, the empty store. But the air where the figure had been reflected felt colder, and the sound of faint, rhythmic clicking, like a hospital machine trying to register a pulse, echoed once, then stopped. The next night, I kept telling myself I wasn't going to look at the footage again. I wasn't going to obsess over the coins or the bracelet or the impossible timestamp showing me in a year I hadn't lived yet. I wanted to believe it had all been a mix of fear and imagination, just night shift, paranoia mixed with bad lighting and cheap equipment. But when the clock hit 2 a.m., the store slipped back into that unnatural quiet. Not normal gas station at night quiet, more like the silence inside a sealed room where sound has nowhere to go. And beneath that silence, I could feel something waiting, anticipating. By 2:12, the temperature had dropped. My breath didn't show, but I felt the cold settle into my bones the same way you feel a storm coming before it breaks. The cameras started their flickering again. The sensors clicked faintly like tiny metronomes. That crawling dread returned, filling the aisles like fog. I didn't want to look at the clock, but I did. 2:14 a.m. The door didn't creak open this time. It just shifted. A subtle movement, like the pressure in the room changed, and the glass had no choice but to respond. I watched it inch inward, slower than before, the gap widening just enough for him to slip through. The hooded man stepped inside without a sound. Same clothing, same careful gait, same stillness in his shoulders, like he wasn't really walking, but being drawn forward by something I couldn't see. His steps were so controlled they almost felt rehearsed, like he had done this exact moment, thousands of times. For a heartbeat, I wondered if he was going to repeat the same routine. Coins, water, departure. A loop I could pretend to understand. But tonight, he didn't head straight to the counter. He stopped halfway across the store, and he turned his head, not toward me, not toward the aisles. He turned toward the back wall where the security cameras hung. One of them made a soft mechanical whir as it tried to focus on him, and he tilted his hood slightly upward as if acknowledging it. My stomach tightened. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the camera, as if he knew I'd been watching him through it. Night after night, frame by frame, searching for clues he hadn't given permission for me to see. He stood like that for several long seconds, head lifted, body still, almost posing for the camera. And the monitor showed something horrifying. His face wasn't hidden by a hood on the grainy screen. It was blank, not faceless, blank, like the image refused to render. A smear of pixels that pulsed, glitching in slow, sickening distortions. Then he lowered his head and approached the counter. Different this time. Slower, intentional. When he reached me, he didn't place coins down. He didn't take a bottle of water or gesture toward anything on the shelves. He just stood there. And the longer he stood, the colder the air grew. A thin, ice-like film spread across the surface of the counter, forming delicate crystalline shapes around where his hands hovered. I stared down and forced myself to breathe. "Do you need something?" My voice sounded small, unfamiliar. He didn't move, didn't speak. Then, so slowly I almost didn't catch it, his hood angled upward, not toward me, toward the camera mounted above my head. I followed his gaze just in time to see the monitor behind me freeze. The screen showed the overhead camera's view, but the image had changed. Instead of the hooded man standing in front of me, the frozen frame showed him turned directly toward the lens, staring into it like he was looking through glass into another world. A chill trickled down my spine. He knew I had rewound him, studied him, watched him across decades of footage, and the camera, still frozen, glitched once, revealing something else. Me, standing behind the counter. Not now, not tonight. A version of me in the same uniform, but with different hair, different posture. Older or younger, I couldn't tell. The frame was warped, distant, wrong. The hooded man raised one hand, not toward me, toward the camera. A single finger pointed directly at it. And on the frozen screen, The older version of me reacted, head snapping up as though she'd heard him. That was the moment the camera feed went black. He lowered his hand. And for the first time, I felt, not saw, but felt, his attention turn fully toward me, like a weight pressing into my chest. I couldn't breathe, because everything in my gut told me the truth. He wasn't watching me tonight. He was checking if the version of me in the camera was still where she was supposed to be. When he left, it didn't feel like someone walking out of a store. It felt like the room exhaled, like whatever pressure had been building around my ribs finally loosened just enough for me to breathe again. The door eased open for him the same way it had opened when he came in. Slow, silent, deliberate, then clicked shut behind him with a soft finality that made my skin prickle. The air warmed a little. The light steadied. The cameras gave a single synchronized flicker, as if waking up from a blackout. I didn't move for a while. I just stood there with my hands braced against the counter, staring at the empty space where he'd been, trying to convince myself that the cold, creeping feeling on my arms was just adrenaline instead of something else, something he'd brought with him. Finally, my legs remembered how to work. I stepped back from the counter and grabbed the remote, checking the monitors for any sign of him outside. Nothing. The parking lot was dead still. No cars, no shadows, no man in a hood walking away. It was like he had vanished the moment he crossed the threshold. I rubbed my eyes, my hands shaking, and when I looked down, something was sitting on the counter, a small shape, crumpled, dirty. I flinched so hard I almost knocked over the gum display. I hadn't heard anything drop. Nothing had touched the counter. I had been staring at it only seconds earlier, and I would have sworn on my own life that it had been completely empty. Now there was this, a key tag. One of those old motel keychains you'd get at places that never make it onto Yelp. Thick plastic, faded color, the lettering worn down by time and fingernails and things that should have stayed forgotten. I didn't touch it at first, just stared. The tag was scratched so deeply it looked like it had been dragged across concrete. The color must have once been red or maybe orange, but now it was the murky brown of dried rust. The metal ring at the top was bent, like someone had tried to rip it off. My heartbeat went heavy in my ears. Something about it felt wrong. I leaned closer. The writing was barely legible at first, but as I adjusted it under the buzzing fluorescent light, the text sharpened just enough for me to read it. Room 117, please return. I felt something drop inside me, a cold weight settling in the pit of my stomach. The tag didn't belong here. There was no motel anywhere near the gas station, nothing but highway and a handful of abandoned buildings in either direction for miles. And the worst part? The hooded man hadn't put anything on the counter tonight. Not coins, not a water bottle. Nothing. This key tag had appeared after he left, which meant either I had missed something, no I hadn't, or this thing wasn't produced by anything natural, not placed, not dropped, more like delivered. I reached out and finally touched it. It was cold, not cool, cold. So cold it burned my fingers. I pulled back with a sharp breath, my skin tingling where it had made contact. The key tag spun slightly from the movement, and as it shifted on the counter, I realized it wasn't empty on the back. There were numbers carved into it, not printed, carved. Scratch marks forming a date, not a check-in date, not anything human. It read, 02/14, and under that, faint but deliberate, M-A-Y-A. I stepped back so fast I hit the card rack behind me. My name. My name on something that hadn't existed on this counter 6 seconds ago. I stared at the key tag, at the way it rocked slightly, as though an invisible hand had just set it down. The cameras behind me crackled, all screens flickering once. When they steadied, the parking lot camera showed a single frame burned into its display, an old, discoloured photograph of a motel hallway. Door numbers crooked, wallpaper peeling, room 117 at the end. The hallway was empty, except for a dark shape standing just inside the doorway. Not entering, not leaving, waiting. For who, I didn't know yet. But I already knew the answer. For me. I don't know how long I stared at that motel key tag, turning it over in my mind, trying to make sense of why it felt heavier than a piece of plastic should. Maybe a minute, maybe 10. Time didn't feel real inside that gas station anymore. Not after seeing my name carved into something that shouldn't exist. What snapped me out of it was the temperature. It didn't drop slowly. It fell, like someone opened a walk-in freezer behind me. The hairs on my arms lifted instantly. The breath in my throat froze halfway. My first thought was that the AC had kicked on. But then I heard the hum overhead change pitch, then fade completely. Every noise in the building faded with it. The coolers, the fluorescent lights, the tiny buzz of electricity in the walls. They all died at once. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick, like a blanket pressed over my ears. I turned toward the door, automatically, some part of me expecting to see it cracked open again. But it was sealed shut. The glass held nothing but the dark reflection of the store behind me. I took one step back from the counter. That's when the light nearest the coffee station flickered, just once. A long, low pulse. The glow dimmed to nearly nothing. And for a heartbeat, I saw a shape flicker in the reflection of the metal fridge door. Tall, hooded, still. I whipped around, my breath catching in my throat. Nothing. The aisle was empty. The coolers hummed faintly from leftover vibrations, but the actual power was gone. My heartbeat was loud enough to echo. Then the lights above me flickered again. Once. Twice. A stuttering, almost panicked pulse. I didn't even hear footsteps. He was just there. One blink I was alone. The next. He stood behind the counter, right in front of me. I recoiled so hard my back hit the cigarette case. The hooded man didn't move with me. He stood inches from the register, his head tilted slightly, not down at me, but angled so he faced just over my shoulder, toward the wall of blank monitors. He was too close. His presence sucked the warmth from the air like a vacuum, freezing the space between us. The smell hit me next. Not rot, not dirt. Something older. Like a building that had been underwater, then unearthed. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. He leaned forward. Slowly, slowly, slowly. Until the darkness beneath his hood hovered inches from my face. I still couldn't see a face. Nothing caught the light. It was like looking into a tunnel with no end. His voice came out like air forced through broken glass, dry, rasping, wrong. The basement lights are on again. The words vibrated in the air, not loud, but heavy, like they weren't meant for sound at all, like they belonged underground, buried under concrete and forgotten hallways. As soon as he finished whispering, he jerked back, not stepped, not turned, jerking, like a puppet yanked by a wire. Then he was gone. No sound, no fading, just gone. The lights flickered back on at full brightness, buzzing sharply as if gasping for air. The hum of the coolers returned. The sensors beeped once in confusion, and I realized I was still pressed against the cigarette case, my entire body shaking. I forced myself to look at the monitors. Every screen was active again, but one had changed, the basement camera feed. We didn't have a basement. We didn't have a camera for one either. And yet, there it was on the screen. A long stairwell, white tile, old fluorescent lights overhead. Every light was off, except one, a flickering bulb at the end of the hallway, glowing weakly, as if someone or something had just turned it back on. I didn't want to look at the screens again. Every instinct screamed not to, like the moment you smell something rotten behind a door and know opening it will only make everything worse. But my hands weren't listening. They moved, on their own, slow and trembling, as I reached for the DVR controls. The basement feed that shouldn't exist was still playing. The flickering light at the end of that long tile hallway buzzed faintly, like it was struggling to stay alive. Shadows rippled beneath it, stretching and shrinking in irregular pulses, and for a moment I thought I saw something move just out of frame. Something tall, something still, something watching the camera from just beyond the glow. I swallowed hard and forced my eyes to the timestamp. 2:18 a.m. Except the clock on the wall behind me said 2:16. The feed was ahead of real time. My pulse thudded against my ribs. I knew I should have shut the system down. I knew nothing good ever came from watching things you weren't meant to watch. But a thick, heavy dread pulled me toward the next recording button like gravity. My thumb hovered, shaking, breath shallow. Then I clicked it. The monitors stuttered. One long static smear across all 10 screens before they blinked back on in perfect synchrony. Every screen showed the store, my store, the aisles, the counter, the front door. But it wasn't real time. I could tell immediately. Something about the colors, too flat, too dull, made the footage look like memory instead of reality. The timestamp confirmed it. 2:18 a.m., 2 minutes from now. I leaned closer, dread dripping down my spine like ice water. There I was, on screen, standing behind the counter exactly as I was now. Same posture, same hand on the mouse, same terrified look smeared across my face. Except this version of me wasn't moving. She was stuck in a single moment, like the recording hadn't fully rendered, but the rest of the image was moving, specifically the space behind me. At first, it was just a shadow, a tall shape rising from the darker corner between the employee door and the snack aisle. Slow, too slow, as if the figure was climbing out of the darkness rather than stepping forward. The hood appeared first, then the shoulders, then the rest of him, assembled piece by piece from the gloom, like he wasn't entering the frame but forming inside it. The hooded man, standing directly behind the recorded version of me, not moving, not breathing, just staring. I pressed pause out of instinct. The screen froze. He stood no more than a foot from my back, his hood angled downward toward the top of my head, like he was studying me, claiming me, deciding something about me. My real body locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't think past the static roaring in my ears, because if the recording was right, in 2 minutes, he would be behind me. I hit play again. The future me on the screen twitched, barely perceptible, just enough to show she was about to turn around. The hooded man didn't react. He didn't need to. His attention was absolute. The timestamp flicked forward. 2:17. 2:17:34. 2:17:58. He leaned in closer, closer. His hood nearly brushed the back of my future self's hair. The silence in the store thickened, heavy enough to taste. I realized then that I hadn't heard the hum of the coolers in several minutes, or the lights, or anything at all. The world was holding its breath, and then the future me on the screen began to turn. Slowly, slowly, slowly. Her head pivoted just enough for the edge of her cheek to come into view, and I felt the scream clawing up my throat because The hooded man was no longer in the frame. Not behind her. Not anywhere. The timestamp flicked to 2:18 Nure. Behind me, something shifted the air. A soft, hollow pressure, like someone leaning in. The screen flickered one more time, freezing on the exact moment my future self's eyes widened. And the chapter ends before I turn around.